Hello everyone, and welcome to Train Talk. On this episode, we are going to talk about the F59 passenger locomotive built by Electromotive Division, now called Electromotive Diesel. We will talk about the history of both the F59PH and the F59PHI, as well as what the future holds in store for these locomotives. But first, what is an F59? The F59PH is a diesel-electric passenger locomotive built by Electromotive Division in cooperation with Toronto, Canada's GO Transit Commuter Railroad. In many aspects, the F59 is like a newer version of the F40PH, a locomotive I discussed in an earlier episode of Train Talk. Like the F40, the F59PH is essentially a freight locomotive that has been modified for passenger service. It was based off the EMD Ep.15 locomotive and features a body that covers the entire width of the frame and a Canadian-style 3-window cab. One major difference externally between the F59PH and the F40 is that the F59 has a front walking platform similar in style to a freight locomotive. The F59PH is equipped with a 12-cylinder 710 block motor, or prime mover, and original models were geared for a top speed of 83 miles per hour. Another key difference between the F59 and the older F40 is that the F59 has a separate generator for head-end power to provide electricity for the passenger cars. This allows the prime mover to be operated independently, greatly saving on fuel consumption. The F59PHI is basically an updated, streamlined version of the F59PH, but more on that in a minute. Let's take a brief look at the locomotive model number. F indicates the locomotive has a full-width body, 59 is the model number, P indicates gearing for passenger speeds, and H denotes that the locomotive is equipped for head-end power. The F59PH was first produced in 1988 for Toronto's GO Transit commuter trains. At the time, GO Transit had a hodgepodge fleet of several different aging locomotives. Between 1988 and 1994, GO purchased 49 of the locomotives, which became the only units in the fleet, although they sold the last 4 of these locomotives to the Texas Trinity Railway Express in 1997, just 3 years after they were built. The only other railroad to purchase the F59PH new from EMD was the Los Angeles Metrolink, receiving 23 units in 1992 and 1993. While the F59 was a decent locomotive, its boxy cab was quite clunky and lacked any kind of aerodynamic design. EMD worked in cooperation with Amtrak to improve the design of the F59. The result was the F59PHI, a sleek, futuristic locomotive. Streamlined side skirts were added covering the fuel tank, and rounded castings were added to the roofline to smooth out the edges. A detachable fiberglass nose cone was added, making damaged nose repairs much easier. The locomotive was also equipped with the new EMD isolated cab design, giving the crew a smoother, quieter ride in the cab. This change is reflected in the locomotive's new model number by the letter I for isolated cab. Because of its new look, the F59PHI was often called a rocket ship engine. Mechanically and electronically, the locomotive was essentially the same as the older F59PH. The California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, became the first buyer of the F59PHI in 1994, purchasing 9 of the locomotives, followed shortly by Metrolink purchasing 8. Caltrans was looking for new locomotives to be used on state-supported intercity Amtrak trains. The F59PHI fit the bill with a top speed of 110 miles per hour. The next major order for F59PHIs came in 1996 when Amtrak purchased 21 locomotives. 16 units were designated for Pacific Surfliner service, with the last 5 of the order going to the Pacific Northwest for use on Amtrak Cascades trains. Later on, one of the Pacific Surfliner units was transferred to the Pacific Northwest pool. Over the next few years, a number of commuter agencies also purchased F59s from EMD, including San Diego Coaster, Seattle Sound Transit, Vancouver West Coast Express, and AMT in Montreal. The North Carolina Department of Transportation also purchased 2 F59PHI locomotives for use on the state-supported Amtrak Piedmont trains between Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina. Caltrans placed another order for 6 locomotives in 2001, and both Metrolink and the Texas Trinity Railway Express picked up a few units that were part of canceled orders for other railroads. Eventually, a total of 83 units were built between 1994 and 2001. In 2001, the F59 was officially retired from EMD's catalog as they were not able to meet current EPA regulations for diesel engine particle emissions. The F59 continued to soldier on for several years. They weren't quite as durable as their F40 predecessors, but they still got the job done. By 2008, replacement had begun for the F59. Go Transit's oldest F59PHs were turning 20 years old at the time, and the railroad began replacing them with new MP40 locomotives built by Motive Power Incorporated. Several of the used Go F59s found new homes with AMT in Montreal, Chicago Metra, and the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Still more ended up as lease units, with 3 of these going to Metrolink. While Go elected to retire most of their F59 fleet, Caltrans rebuilt all 15 of their F59PHI locomotives with more efficient 710 Eco motors that meet the EPA's Tier 2 emissions standards. In addition to Caltrans, Metrolink had a few of their F59PH locomotives rebuilt by Motive Power Inc. in Boise, Idaho to meet these same standards. By 2015, several operators had plans to replace their F59 fleet. First was Metrolink with a plan to replace all of their F59 locomotives with 40 brand new EMD F125 locomotives. As of late 2017, several F125 locomotives have been built, but none of them have entered regular service. Along with Metrolink, the Washington Department of Transportation and the California Department of Transportation announced plans to purchase several new SC-44 Charger locomotives built by Siemens. Washington ordered 8 locomotives to replace the Amtrak-owned F59s in Amtrak Cascade service, and California ordered 22 locomotives. Of these 22, 16 are intended to replace all of the Amtrak-owned F59s currently in Surfliner service, with the other 6 to be used on the San Joaquin and Capital Corridor trains alongside the Caltrans-owned F59s. Also in 2017, Coaster announced that it was actively seeking replacements for all 7 of its locomotives, including their 2 F59PHIs. So, what does the future hold in store for the F59? With all these railroads retiring F59s, is this the end? Well, in all likelihood, not just yet. Over the last few decades, several commuter agencies and state-sponsored Amtrak trains have started or increased service. In many cases, these railroads have opted to go with used locomotives rather than much more expensive new ones. So, it is likely that many will be resold to new operators and continue running for many more years, as has already been the case with many of the retired Go Transit F59PH locomotives. In addition to resale, some railroads will most likely choose to rebuild their F59 locomotives and continue using them for several years. Sound Transit has nearly completed a program to rebuild all 11 of their F59PHI locomotives and upgrade them to meet EPA Tier 3 emissions standards. At any rate, the F59s are not going away for quite a while. The F59 may not have been the most significant or noteworthy locomotive built, but it is still very deserving of a mention in the history of modern passenger rail in the United States. Thank you for watching this episode of Train Talk. If you enjoyed the video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up and leaving a comment below. Also, if you aren't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and select the Receive Notifications option to be alerted of my latest video uploads. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.